Last summer, at the age of 20, I felt lost and empty after a painful breakup that shattered my world. I had spent 3 long years with someone I cared about deeply, and suddenly, I was left with nothing but sorrow and confusion. Desperate for an escape from the haunting loneliness, I accepted an invitation from my best friend Caleb. His family was very wealthy, and they owned a secluded lake house in northern Wisconsin that promised a break from my troubles, a place where I could lose myself in nature and perhaps find a spark of hope. When Caleb and I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun was still high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the quiet stretch of water and the surrounding dense forest. The lake house was a grand 2-story building with large windows that offered breathtaking views of the shimmering lake and a wraparound deck that seemed to extend the beauty of the outdoors right into the living space. The air was fresh with the scent of lake moss and cedar, and the distant sound of chirping crickets blended perfectly with the peaceful atmosphere. Although most of the houses along the shore were dark and unoccupied, the loneliness of the area made it feel almost like our own private haven. I spent the day wandering along the deck and dipping my hand into the cool water, skipping smooth stones across its surface while the fading sunlight danced on the ripples. As the evening deepened, I settled on the warm wooden dock with Caleb, sipping on a few beers as the sky turned a deep purple, embroidered with emerging stars. It was during this quiet moment of solace that I noticed a strange flickering light moving steadily across the lake. At first, I assumed it was nothing more than a trick of the fading light, perhaps a reflection from one of the few lit houses along the far shore. But as I watched, the light revealed itself to be deliberate, flashing in a distinct pattern of 3 short bursts followed by 3 long ones, and then 3 short again. It was unmistakably Morse code, a distress signal that sent a chill through me. My heart pounded as I realized that someone might be calling for help. The steady, rhythmic flashes on the dark water seemed to pulse with an urgency that I could not ignore. Despite the fear gnawing at the edges of my mind, the need to help overcame my hesitancy. Caleb's worried look mirrored my own inner turmoil, and we both silently agreed to investigate, driven by a mix of recklessness and genuine concern. After gathering a couple of switchblades from a small stash Caleb kept for emergencies, we left the comforting safety of the lake house. The cool night air immediately embraced us as we stepped onto the dew-damp grass. Our only means to reach the source of the mysterious light was an old, worn-out kayak stored in a nearby shed, a vessel with faded paint and scratches that spoke of many past adventures. We pushed the kayak into the dark water, the sound of its hull scraping against the rocky bank echoing in the stillness of the night. Paddling away from the shore, the thrill of our daring decisions soon gave way to a deep sense of foreboding. The lake was calm and eerily silent, disturbed only by the steady dip of our paddles and the soft lapping of water against the hull. Each stroke required effort, and with every pull, I could feel the cold seep into my skin, amplifying the unsettling feeling that we were venturing into dangerous territory. After a few tense minutes, the outline of a dilapidated house emerged from the darkness along the far shore. Unlike the welcoming lake house we had left behind, this building was in a state of decay. Its paint peeled away in long, tattered strips, and the dock leading to it sagged precariously, its broken planks jutting out like jagged teeth. My heart sank as I realized that the flashing light had already stopped, leaving the structure cold and lifeless, a stark contrast to the urgent signal we had seen. We guided the kayak closer until its hull brushed against the gravelly, moss-covered shore. I was the first to step onto the slippery ground, feeling the damp rocks under my sneakers and the unsettling smell of decay and wet wood filling the air. The overgrown yard, tangled with wild weeds, added to the sense of neglect and isolation that surrounded the old house. Every step toward the building heightened my anxiety. What had begun as a spontaneous adventure now felt like a dangerous foray into the unknown. I decided against entering through the front door, knowing full well that it would draw too much attention. Instead, I circled the house slowly until I discovered a small, cracked window left slightly ajar. The warped wood creaked as I pushed it open and slipped inside, my body tense with every cautious movement. What I found inside was a hollow emptiness, a barren interior devoid of furniture or any signs of recent life. The stale air, heavy with dust and mildew, filled my lungs as I moved from room to room, my every step echoing in the silence. After exploring the main floor, I discovered a narrow staircase that led to the second level. Each creaking step added to the suspense that was building within me. On the second floor, I followed a long, dim corridor lined with closed doors until I reached one room in particular that seemed to be the source of the earlier signal. I pressed my ear to the door, half expecting to hear a faint sound of distress, but there was only an overwhelming silence. With trembling hands, I slowly pushed the door open and stepped into the room. There, positioned by a window that overlooked the dark landscape, sat an old, clunky projector. Its lens was directed outward, and it flickered weakly, as if deliberately set up to send that Morse code signal. In that moment, I realized that everything had been a trap, a calculated lure designed to bring me here. Before I could process my thoughts, I became aware of a sudden heavy presence behind me. Panic surged through my body as I heard hurried footsteps and the ominous sound of a door slamming open somewhere nearby. In a burst of adrenaline, I bolted back down the hall, desperate to escape the unfolding danger. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it might give away my position. I raced toward the window through which I had entered, pushing myself over the threshold and into the overgrown yard once again. Outside, the night had grown even colder, and a dark, imposing figure moved swiftly near the side of the house. Terror overtook me, and I instinctively clutched the switchblade in my hand, its cold metal a small comfort in that moment of utter dread. With no time to think, I made a split-second decision. I jumped into the lake. The icy water hit me like a shock, robbing me of my breath as I plunged into its depths. I swam with every ounce of strength, my arms burning with exertion and the relentless chill of the water numbing my limbs. Each stroke was a desperate effort to reach the distant glow of the lake house on the opposite shore, a beacon of safety amidst the oppressive darkness. My mind was consumed by raw fear and the singular thought of survival, driving me onward even as the water seemed to drag me back into its depths. After what felt like an eternity, I finally reached a dock near the lake house. My entire body trembled uncontrollably from the cold, and every muscle ached with exhaustion. Gasping for air and shivering uncontrollably, I rushed inside the lake house, bolting every door behind me in a frantic bid for safety. With trembling hands, I dialed the police, hoping that help would arrive before the mysterious threat could catch up to me. Nearly an hour later, the sound of approaching sirens broke the tense silence. The flashing lights of the police cars cut through the darkness as they arrived to inspect the abandoned house. They soon confirmed what I had feared. The building was a long-forgotten relic, deserted for years with no sign that anyone had lived there recently. Their harsh words and stern faces did little to ease the lingering terror that clung to me like a shadow. In the days that followed, I was left with an unsettling mystery that still haunts me. I have never been able to understand who had set that trap or what terrible plan they had in store if I had not managed to escape. The memory of that cold, desperate swim and the terror of that unknown presence continues to echo in my mind. Now, whenever I find myself near a body of water, I am reminded of that fateful night, the flashing light, the eerie silence, and the heart-pounding realization that sometimes danger comes in the most unexpected forms. Story number 2. I have vivid memories of our old lake house near Maple Lake in Vermont, a place my family had cherished for as long as I can remember. The modest two-story building sat right on the edge of a quiet, glimmering lake and was surrounded by towering pine trees that stretched high into a misty sky. In my childhood, that weathered wooden retreat was a world of wonder and safety. Every summer, my younger sister Lila and I would race to the house, excited for the adventures that awaited us. One of our favorite spots was the attic, a small, secret space tucked under the steep roof. We would haul our sleeping bags up the narrow ladder, carrying our old scruffy dog Jasper along with us. In that cramped attic, with its slanted walls and a single small window overlooking the lake, we felt like true explorers. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and mothballs, and the creaky floorboards seemed to whisper secrets of summers long past. We would press our faces against the dusty glass, giggling as we watched boats drift by and locals fishing along the shore. That attic was our private world, a hideout where time felt endless, and every moment was magic. As we grew older, however, the attic gradually became a memory. Our bodies changed, and the carefree days of childhood faded away. The lake house remained, though, and it carried the weight of our family history. After our grandparents passed away, the house took on a new role. My parents inherited a collection of old furniture, a sturdy oak dresser, a creaky rocking chair, and boxes filled with chipped teacups and faded photo albums. With so many cherished relics, the attic was transformed into a storage space, cluttered with memories that my parents couldn't bear to part with. Every time I helped carry a box up that creaking ladder, I felt both the warmth of nostalgia and a twinge of sadness for the loss of simpler times. Years passed, and life pulled us in different directions. College and busy careers meant that we could only manage one brief visit a year. Most of the time, the lake house stood silent, its windows dark and its porch slowly gathering pine needles. My parents refused to rent it out, worried that outsiders might damage the old treasures left behind. The lake itself lay in front of the house, calm and cold, reflecting the somber Vermont sky. I would sometimes sit by the shore and feel a deep, lingering guilt for having left behind a place that held so many precious memories. Then, a few years later, my parents decided to change things. They welcomed a tenant named George into the lake house. George was an old man, a veteran with a slight, wiry frame, a crooked back, and a long, tangled white beard. His eyes were pale and seemed to linger on everything with an unsettling intensity. My father, who had always admired those who had served, felt a kinship with him and agreed to let him stay under a year-long lease. My mother and I were uneasy about sharing our family haven with a stranger, especially after hearing whispers from the landscapers about his odd behavior. They said he would often be seen on the porch, his thin figure slumped in a creaking chair, watching the children play by the lake with a stare that felt far too long and too fixed. Although I tried to dismiss these accounts as mere exaggerations, an unshakable feeling of discomfort settled over me. When George's lease ended, my father made a decision that surprised us all. Citing the need for renovations as a convenient excuse, he asked George to leave. The move came quietly. Landscapers even helped haul his belongings from the gravel drive. Although I felt a quiet relief, a part of me mourned the loss of a link to our past, however troubled that connection might have been. Not long after, our family planned a summer reunion to celebrate my sister Lila's graduation from college. My parents arranged the trip as a way to reconnect with our roots, and we all traveled back to Maple Lake. This time, a new member joined our family, a lively black lab mix named Raven, whose boundless energy and floppy ears quickly endeared him to us. I remember the excitement in Lila's eyes as she anticipated meeting him, a spark of joy that had been missing in recent years. We arrived at the lake house late in the afternoon. The familiar scent of damp earth and pine filled the air as we drove the winding road, and the silhouette of the house emerged against the deepening twilight. That evening, after a quick dinner in a small-town diner, we returned home, tired and ready to settle in for the night. As I stepped inside, turning on the lights, an inexplicable chill ran down my spine. Something was off. The house felt too still, as if it were holding its breath. I soon discovered the source of my unease when I found Raven lying at the bottom of the stairs. The poor dog's chest heaved as a dark stain of blood spread around him. My stomach sank at the sight. In that moment, every happy memory of past summers seemed to fade into a distant echo, replaced by a stark, raw fear that something was terribly wrong. My heart pounded as I joined my family in a silent, frantic search through the house. We moved cautiously, our footsteps barely making a sound on the creaking wooden floors. The living room was empty and cold, and the kitchen windows offered only darkness in return for our rising anxiety. As we climbed the stairs, each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the top, I froze. The attic hatch, once a symbol of childhood wonder, was now open. A narrow beam of light spilled down the ladder, stark against the gloom. My father wasted no time. He grabbed the hatch, pulled it down, and ascended the rickety ladder, his knife clutched tightly in his hand. I stayed behind, paralyzed with dread, listening for any sound from above. There was no struggle, only silence. When my father finally returned, his face was etched with worry and a sorrowful resignation. Later, I learned that George had been discovered hiding in the attic, crouched among the shadows, as if he had never truly left the house. The police arrived soon after, and they escorted the frail man away, his presence confirming all the unsettling whispers I had tried to ignore. In the aftermath, emotions ran high at the lake house. My mother's anger was palpable. She could not accept that someone had violated the sanctity of our family home in such a disturbing manner. My father, however, chose not to press charges, expressing a quiet pity for George that I struggled to understand. The disagreement tore at the fabric of our family, leaving scars that time has not yet healed. It has been a year since that haunting night, and I have not stepped foot in that lake house again. The once beloved retreat full of laughter and secret hideouts, now feels like a place haunted by memories too painful to bear. I still see the image of Raven and the echo of my father's footsteps on the attic ladder, each one a reminder of the night that changed everything. Although the serene beauty of Maple Lake still calls to me, I now approach it with a wary heart, forever marked by the shadows that lurk in the attic of my past. Thanks for listening. Subscribe for more horror videos. Goodbye.